Welcome everyone to our session of the Fall 2024 series, Tuesday Times Roundtable. TTR is an official Office of Global Learning Initiatives flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends while fostering meaningful conversations on topics aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. All TTRs are recorded, and you can learn more about TTR, watch past recordings, or come back to reference this one by visiting go.fiu.edu/TTR. Please take a moment to sign in using this QR code or link listed on the screen. We're also going to put it in the chat as well. This sign-in is what we use to report the attendance, and it would also close at 1 p.m. So whether you're here as part of the Global Learning Medallion Point, Honors College Engagement Points, extra credit from your professor, or whatever brought you to us today, we're glad you're here. My name is Janeri Mendoza Farjun, your Senior Program Coordinator here at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. A special thank you to the Global Learning team, Program Manager Michelle Saldivar, and our graduate assistants, Natalia and Gitangeli, as well as Assistant Director of Global First Year, Rola. One second. Just a moment here. All right, so can I ask my team if I'm sharing the right slide right now? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Okay, so if you would like to learn more about the opportunities at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, check our programs at global.fiu.edu/students, or come back to our peer advisors drop-in hours available in person or via Zoom every Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram by using the QR code so you can engage in global learning's opportunities at FIU. The Global Learning Medallion students, a reminder to please take a screenshot of your sign-in so you may use it for your activities log. Okay, so all TTR sessions are usually centered in a global issue or trend, and it is always linked to a New York Times article that continues the conversation. You may read the article for this week by visiting go.fiu.edu/TTR0917. This is because FIU provides everyone with an FIU email address with free digital access to the New York Times. So if you haven't done so, you may visit accessnyt.com. And today's session is about empowering change, implementing solutions in developing contexts. It relates to SDG number 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. By making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So to learn more about the SDGs, you might visit the link go.fiu.edu/SDG. All right, and now we can get started by introducing today's session leader, Tarek Abdelraouf. He's the project manager at the Center of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the American University in Cairo. Tarek focuses on developing partnerships and programs that support the development field. His main areas of work are in capacity building, policy development, and corporate governance, among others. During his time in the United States of America, Tarek spent his undergraduate and graduate years working in different capacities with organizations such as the International Rescue Committee, the Impact Community Foundation, and Florida International University, of course. He was also a board member for the United Nations Association of Miami Chapter. Tarek is an FIU alumni, He has a master's in arts in global affairs from FIU. And then he also completed a graduate diploma in sustainable development from the American University in Cairo. Welcome, Tarek, to today's TTR. I'll turn it over to you now.
There we go. Thank you for that introduction. Let me share my screen real quick, and then we can start. First of all, you said FIU alumni, and I feel like an FIU fossil after all of that, because I just completely forgot how long it's been I spent at FIU. But hey, everybody, my name is Tarek Abdelraouf. Currently, I live in Cairo, Egypt. I've been home for the past few years, about 4 of them. And today we're going to talk about empowering change and implementing solutions in the developing context. To start off, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about not who I am necessarily, because that might bore all of us. But I wanted to share a little bit about how I got to be where I am. More specifically, because when I moved to the States, I moved in 2012. I moved as a mechanical engineering major. And my whole dream and life and my interest and my impact and the thing that I really wanted to do most was design iPhones for Apple. And considering where we went from there, it kind of changed everything. And like FIU completely changed the way that I thought about my life. It all started when I first moved in 2012. I had already spent 2 years in the American University in Cairo. I did 2 years of mechanical engineering. And I spent 1 more year at FIU as a mechanical engineer. And then I switched, like Janeri said, to political science and psychology, among some of the other things that I studied since then. And really, a lot of the focus that happened, or like a lot of the reason why I switched so massively, especially coming from a country like Egypt, where you're either a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure, you really wanted to be sure about what you were doing and why you were doing it, and kind of prove to your parents that, hey, listen, if I tell you I'm going to be into political science or something like humanities or anything like this, then you need to believe in what I'm trying to do here. And honestly, a lot of the biggest reason why this was okay or why this worked was, and this is not because you guys hosted me today, was global learning, was ISSS at the time, was all of these programs like joining TTRs. I remember attending TTRs 10 years ago and just being, I kind of wish I was at FIU today and kind of doing this in person in that room in GC. I don't remember the number, but I kind of wish we could do it in GC. But it's great to be back. It's great to talk to you guys today. I wanted to kind of share a little bit about where I've been since I came home first and how the development field kind of shaped my thinking right now. And then we can talk a little bit about what development is, the tools that we can use in developing, and just kind of the important things to think about, because FIU especially is a very international, obviously, international place. And a lot of the people that come in are either international students, have international backgrounds, come from a different place. We're mixed in one way or another. And a lot of people might want to go home and might want to do different things back in their home country. And I'm really hoping that something you can take out of today is, okay, if I do go home and I want to do something to better my country, then these are the kind of like the basic guidelines that will help me reach that place. So I moved back in 2019. It was in the midst of COVID. I decided that I spent 8 years of my life in the States. I worked at FIU. I graduated my undergrad in FIU. I did my graduate studies in FIU. I worked in FIU. I bled FIU in all different ways. And it was about time to kind of come home and try and see all of this studying, all of this education, all of this money that I spent kind of come into fruition in some way. So I moved home in 2019. I had a complete reverse culture shock. We were just talking about this before we started the TTR. Completely trying to realign myself with the business world of working in Egypt, the conversations that we might have. And my main focus at the time was, oh yeah, I have all of this knowledge. I'm definitely just going to come implement it one way or another. And I was completely wrong because that's not how life works. And what we learn and how we implement them are two different things. And the important thing to see is how we can kind of translate all of this knowledge that we have, all of these things that you learn in your TTRs to the implementation, or kind of just the field work that you end up doing. So a little bit of background about what I've been doing since then is, after I moved back to Egypt, I worked in a think tank called the BUC Center for Global Affairs. This center was run by a previous ambassador, a assistant minister of foreign affairs, and they were really heavily focused on trying to bring policy reform and doing extensive evidence-based research on different issues that we were facing in Egypt, and how we can present this reform to, whether you want to call it, we don't call it Congress here, but like Congress, how we can present this data or research that we have to fellow ambassadors, fellow ministers, et cetera, and trying to kind of have an impact in one way or another. Obviously, there was a lot of confusion there for me, because I thought, okay, I was just going to come home, I'm going to write papers like I did for Professor Lob or whatever I was doing at the time, and it's going to be the same thing. And then obviously the context was different. I had to go into the field. We had to talk to government officials. We had to do all of this field work that we were just hearing about back in our classwork, and obviously just wasn't the same. And then after that, I moved to the American University in Cairo, where I am right now. I worked a little bit in, if you guys know what carbon credits is, so I built a center for carbon credits at the American University along with my team, obviously. We worked on capacity building, like Janeri was saying. I focus heavily on capacity building. We started a center called CClear, which is a Cairo Excellence Center for Excellence on Water, essentially. And what the center did is it supported African resilience on climate change, or it's still doing. It supported African resilience on climate change, and it would bring in middle managers and government entities all across Africa to Egypt to support their advancement in one way or another. And then I worked a little bit in the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation. I worked as a consultant to the minister, because he wanted to do this big reform for carbon credits, and he wanted to calculate the whole ministry's carbon emissions, and it took a very long time, and it was very complicated because Egypt is a very big country, and obviously it's not done yet, but we're on our way there. And currently, like Janeri said, I work in the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, where I work on a project called Women on Boards. Essentially what it is there is a piece of policy in Egypt that says that we want to have at least 30% of all our corporate boards be represented by women, because we have an extreme underrepresentation of women in corporate positions, especially on corporate leadership boards. So we need to do something to kind of elevate that gap. And the way we do this is we raise awareness to corporations about the importance of balance and diversity and inclusion. We do capacity building workshops for women who are interested in corporate boards. And we kind of do that way to kind of elevate their skills and their ability so that they can join corporate boards without any problems. And soon, hopefully, in the next month, I will be joining, if you guys know JPAL. JPAL is the Abdelraouf Jameel Poverty Action Lab. It is an MIT-born Center for Evidence-Based Research. I will be moving there in October 1st as a capacity building project manager to do more of the same work, just on a different scale. JPAL works on the MENA region as a whole, so I'm so excited for the extra work that I will be doing. So a little bit of background about the development context. First of all, before we talk about development, we have to talk about why development is important, right? And you may or may not have seen the Millennium Development Goals before, but essentially, very brief history about what they are is that they are 8 goals that were born in 2000, the year 2000. They were the first set of goals agreed upon by the whole world. And they were essentially made to achieve all of these targets that you see in front of you. Now, the main problem with the Millennium Development Goals is that, first of all, they failed entirely. They were not very successful. They were not very well targeted. And the main problem there is because when we look at development and the development context itself, it's important to make sure that we have the realities of the countries that we're trying to support. And this is one of the biggest things that I, on a personal level, had to relearn when I moved home. So working in development, even on the field, right? Like if I'm in a research center, like in the American University in Cairo, it's one of the most prestigious places to be in Egypt. But if you don't know the local realities underneath the work that you're trying to do, there's no way you're going to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve because you just don't understand the people that you're trying to help out. And the same works on an international scale. So the Millennium Development Goals were built, they were created mostly focused by the US and other partners in that sense. And they were seen from those eyes, from the developed world's eyes, to help the developing world. And obviously, when this context turned into reality, they weren't as successful as people thought they were because they didn't take into consideration all of the different issues that each country would face. So this problem was fixed a little bit now, and obviously the TTRs have been surrounded or have been surrounding the Sustainable Development Goals, or you've heard them one way or another, or you've heard them everywhere actually. 17 specific goals that were made with the developing world's context in mind. They're not perfect. Nobody says they're perfect. They have a lot of gaps and a lot of issues, obviously, but it was the first time that we see 17 or specific goals that were made with an understanding that we need to hear, listen, and learn from those that we're trying to support. And although our conversation today isn't about the international scale of how countries can help countries, and more about me wanting to give you guys an understanding that if you do go into the development field, then you understand to make sure or to focus on working on the local reality that you're trying to help. But I take the SDGs as a first great step towards listening and hearing each other before we can start doing anything really. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the SDGs and what they are and all of the different targets and indicators that are inside them. Check out the website. But it is a great first step towards achieving this. And then this is something that excited me even more. So when the SDGs were made, they were made in a way that made sure people would understand them, take them into consideration, and build their own national strategies, or countries would build their own national strategies towards achieving the SDGs within their own local realities. So Egypt, for example, we have something called the Vision 2030. And what Vision 2030 is, it's essentially, it's a booklet, like massive. And what it is it's a strategy created by Egypt in 2015, all the way until to achieve in 2030, taking into consideration the SDGs, the targets and indicators within the SDGs, and putting it into a local reality, a local context, how we can achieve our own goals through the SDGs. And that's essentially what every other country voluntarily decided to do. I don't think every country, but a lot of countries have decided to create, I don't like saying the NSDS, kind of tongue twisting for me, but you get the idea. So this was very important. This was very interesting as well for the development field, right? So now, Tarek, while working in the development field, when I want to do a new project, when I'm working on a new proposal that I'm going to present to UN Women or I'm going to present to USAID or whatever, having in mind Vision 2030 and implementing a lot of the things that Vision 2030 has inside my proposal affects my project, because now I'm not only working on myself and not only working on my local reality, but instead I'm also working towards my country's vision. So it's all aligned in one beautiful kind of utopian way. Obviously, this is not 100% how life works, but on paper, it's great. And it's something that we haven't had before. And it's been very supportive in the development work. Excuse me. So this is what I really want to talk about with you guys, is the complexities of the development field. Because if I've learned anything, it's that things are not as great and as easy as I would like them to be. So even though, yes, I want to come in, get a fund from UN Women for $10 million, and I want to implement this great project that I have because we're going to create entrepreneurship-based business solution services centers in Egypt's 20 governorates, life isn't that easy. And like we talked about earlier, one of the main issues that we face, for example, in the complexities of development is the cultural and social barriers that we face. So even within a country like Egypt, not that big, we're all supposed to be speaking the same language. We're all having the same ideas, but we're so different, right? Egypt has 27 governorates, and within every governorate, or between every governorate, you will find slight language barriers, slight slang barriers. We talk in different ways. We believe in different things, not necessarily religiously or something, but the social norms change from one place to another. The interests and the focuses and the priorities of each governorate are so different. Even just the pride. Some of our governorates are so much more prideful than others in like how you approach them, how you talk to them, how interested they are in the development. If somebody's shaking their head, I like, yes, let's go. So it's very interesting. It's very different. It's something that I've been working for 5 years in this. It took a year and a half at least to kind of start understanding where this bottleneck really existed, because I would go to people and talk to them and be like, hey man, we have money, let's start these projects. And they would just, I'm good, thank you. I don't trust you. I don't like you. And you don't know why, and you don't understand why. And then we began to understand it's because of different priorities. We have to come in from a different perspective. You can't help somebody without understanding where they need help. You can't just tell them what they need help in, because then people feel some type of way. Institutional and government challenges is definitely another thing. I don't want to say corruption because I don't want to get arrested, but I will say that sometimes I had a lot of issues with transparency. So I worked in a think tank, like we talked about, and essentially a lot of what I had to do was talk to government officials, get data and receive information and try to extract something out of this data so I can make it better. And then you couldn't really get this data. I remember one instance when I was working in the ministry. So I was a consultant to the minister. So I was essentially partly his right hand man. People were slightly forced to help me out. So I would talk to somebody and be like, hey man, how many power plants do we have in this specific area or this specific governorate? And just to make numbers easier, he would say 5. We have 5 power plants. And I'm like, great, thank you. And then I would talk to the person right next to him. I'm like, he said we have 5 power plants. He would go, no, we have 3. And then you wouldn't know who's right. Nobody knows who's right. It's an issue. And I'm not bashing on my country. I love it very much, but there is a very clear lack of transparency, of digitalization, of just infrastructure and resources and bureaucracy that complicates not only people who work in the development field, but also complicates people who work in government. So you have to kind of understand the back and forth of it all. It's not just not just me facing these bottlenecks, but it's also the person in front of me trying to understand their own problems as well. So institutional government challenges is definitely a very big issue, not just in developing world. I know the developed countries also have their own issues, but I'm very specifically talking about Egypt, so nobody get offended, please. And then economic constraints, obviously. Poverty and income inequality causes a very big problem. Limited access to financing is extremely important, because when you have projects where I could sit here and I wrote 10 concept notes for different projects that we can implement all over Egypt that would probably support not just businesses, but women empowerment, youth empowerment. We can do all of these things and have all of these projects, but I need $1 billion. And not everyone will give me $1 billion, unfortunately. But if I did have $1 billion, I could probably fix a lot of things, but not alone. So this is a different problem that we have, especially when you think about a country like Egypt, for example, is a hub in the MENA region for startups. And a lot of the issues that startups face in Egypt is microfinancing or microloans, because people aren't able to support them with microloans because they're facing their own issues. Not necessarily everybody's facing poverty or income inequality, but a lot of people are facing issues with transparency. They're facing issues with how they want to support them with these fundings or finances. tracking the money. It gets complicated and more complicated as we go. But this is a very small brief, at least, about just the complexities of why development is so hard. But it's so fun and also very rewarding, because then you end up helping people who actually do need the help, and then they remember that they helped you out, or you helped them out. So it's a very rewarding field to get into. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone from going home and supporting their country. It's a really interesting feat. I just kind of want you guys to understand a little bit about why it might be not the most luxurious of lifestyles. And then tools for effective implementation. So some of the things that helped me out while working in this field is trying to understand the local needs and priorities, conducting needs assessments, talking to people a lot. One of the most important, honestly, I've been in interviews where people just ask me if I know how to talk to people. Because at the end of the day, if you know how to talk to people, different types of people, different types of anything culturally, socially, whatever, then this is the main key for working in the development field. Because today I can talk to a minister, tomorrow I'll talk to a farmer, the next day I'll talk to a village leader, or I'll just be talking to my boss, and everybody has a different language and a different lifestyle and a different mental capacity. I don't want to insult people, but like, you just have to understand how to open up to people or get people to open up to you more, because at the end of the day, you are a middleman, and working in development is essentially you are a middleman. You are managing projects, you're not implementing them yourself. You are providing these funds and making sure they go to the places that they need to go and supporting the people that they need to support. And the best way to do this is learning how to talk to people in different ways. Stakeholder engagement is exactly what we were talking about. Learning how to, I didn't write this down, and I'm sorry for that, but there's something called stakeholder mapping. And this is probably the most important tool in my life. Understanding the realities alone isn't enough. We also have to do something called a map, or stakeholder mapping. And what this means is that I can draw and draw a map, essentially. It's kind of like when we used to do like mind maps, and it includes all of the different, I know it's funny, but it's super true. And it includes all of the different companies and organizations that work in the field that you're looking at. So if you're doing something like carbon credits and you want to do a stakeholder map for carbon credits, so you go into the field, you do a lot of desk research, you talk to a lot of different people, and you understand who are the biggest emitters, who are the biggest people who are providing solutions, who are people who are working in the middle section, who works in digitalization, and then you start drawing out a map, obviously not with a pen, because that would not be very pretty, but you would start mapping out the ecosystem and trying to understand a little bit more about who can partner with who can talk to who, where to go when you need a specific service or important, or consultants or whatever you need. There's a lot that goes into mapping that really helps you understand the local context in such a better way. And then capacity building, which I do too much, not necessarily too much, but too much. So capacity building essentially just means training, supporting, providing the skills and the tools that people need to be able to perform the actions that you want them to perform. So we have a project called Rabiha, and Rabiha is a UN Women sponsored project along with the Embassy of Canada, and also semi-sponsored by the Embassy of Korea. And the way Rabiha works is it's a platform to support women in 7 different governorates in Egypt who have an idea. So it's an ideation incubator. These people, or these, let's call them participants, they have different ideas for projects that they want to implement, and they're not necessarily implemented them yet. But what Rabiha does is they bring them in, they perform workshops for them, they give them capacity building, they help them learn how to do business models, how to enter into VCMs, how to go into talk to angel investors or talk to investors in general, how to join hackathons, how to go into all these different things. They provide them all of the tools that they need. And that's essentially capacity building. It's just how to provide the tools or the knowledge that anybody needs so that they can go on their own and take ownership over their own projects or their own whatever you're working on. And then obviously just making sure that anything that we do or any project that we work on is sustainable, it's manageable. When we receive funds from people, funds end We have projects that are only 3-4 years long, and then you want to make sure that this project can survive after the 3 or 4 years that you have funding for. So how do you do this? Is it's all in the implementation phase, how you design your project, making sure that after these funds are over, you have different sources of revenue or different sources of financing. And this part, we can have 3 TTRs over sustainability, so we're not going to get too much into it, but we can talk about sending resources if you guys are interested later. And finally, this isn't necessarily anything that we'll talk about. I just want to leave you with a question that you can think about on your own. It's how can we ensure that development projects truly do benefit the communities that they claim to serve? Not necessarily just in the developing world, even if you're just thinking about a project at FIU that you want to make sure it helps students out, or a project that helps out people in our communities anywhere else in the world. When we have projects, it's really important to kind of tailor and make sure that we are talking to people, listening to people, getting feedback from them, and just kind of engaging them in any of the work that we do. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to serve somebody, and the way to serve somebody is make sure that they have a say in what you're doing for them. Thanks, guys. I'm done now.
Thank you, Tarek, for such a wonderful presentation and sharing a little bit about your journey of being a student and now working in the developing work. We're going to let some time for the questions to come into the chat. One question that I wanted, I guess, to follow up from the areas that you shared with us in some Vision 2030, right? So from your work, what have been some overlaps that you had seen between the work that you do in your organization and other parts of the world?
Can you repeat the last part? I'm sorry. Between the work I do and...
Yes, and the work that you do with other countries as well. So there have been any overlaps on Vision 2030 and also the work that gets done on the national SDGs in other parts of the world?
So I haven't directly worked with anybody that wants to work on their own NDCs or their own national determined contributions. The way that we work here essentially is I'll have a project that I want to work on. Actually, I have a very interesting one. So I had a project recently that I wanted to apply to. It was through an Erasmus Plus project, which is an EU funded program. And it's called CBHE, or Capacity Building for Higher Education. And it was a project that was going to provide, essentially, it was going to build centers within universities in AUC and one in Alexandria. And they were going to provide AI, I don't remember the terminology we used, but essentially it was going to teach people it was going to provide professors with a better way to teach. And it was going to be through AI, and it was going to be through VR headsets. And it was this whole big project. And the way it worked is we didn't have the technology, we didn't have the understanding or the knowledge. So we had to partner with people in Europe. So we found a university that we had previously partnered with called Aachen University in Germany. And we talked to them, they got on board, and we talked to a university in Milan, the University of Milan. And we partnered with both of them. Each of them had a different section that they wanted to work on. Milan was going to work on the context itself, or the curriculum that they were going to work on. Aachen had a great lab, or has a great lab on AR and VR that they do. And then both of them were going to partner with us to create this whole curriculum. They were going to come into Egypt, implement it here, and teach professors how to do it. And then it would kind of be like a train of trainers type of thing. So I would teach the professor how to do these things and how to utilize these new tools. And then professors would go and I use my hands a lot, and then the professors would go and teach their students that way. And then it was going to be here in Alexandria, but this project's going to start hopefully next year. But that is kind of how we would partner with other people in that way. For Egypt, it's obviously just due to context harder for us to help countries like in Europe, because that's not how this would work. But what we can do is we help other countries out, like in Africa or the Middle East, or like other parts in Asia, for example. So it depends on the context. What do you have that you can provide to other people, and what do other people have that can provide partnerships?
Awesome. And then also, you talk a little bit on funding, and I know that's a challenge in any project in any parts of the world. But how does that funding works in the projects that you are in charge of, and also the collaboration among the countries?
Yeah, funding is a complicated one. So thankfully, the way funding works is that a lot of these funding agencies or a lot of these development agencies in general, right? USA, EU, any of the embassies in Egypt or whatever, anybody that has a call out for funding, they'll have a budget or they'll have set requirements that you need to meet. And then we get part of our salary comes from these budgets, obviously, because we need to be working on these projects. But the reality of it is that at the end of the day, you as Tarek, I get funding from one project, but then I work on 5 or 6 or 7 because they can't. Not all projects fund salaries, for example. Not all projects will fund whatever funding lines that they have. And then you find yourself, it's also just not enough to be working on one project. You should do more work. But I think that might be just different mentality. But so the way funding works is that somebody will have a call out, you would work on a proposal and you would get your partners in. They would give you a deadline for a month or two, depending on how it is. And then you go through a committee. And this committee reviews your project. They have to analyze it. They go through their own criteria. And then after the criteria is done, they'll send you feedback. Sometimes you'll have to go around 2, or maybe you'll do an interview or you'll do something. It depends. Or you have to like edit something out. It depends. But I worked on it, for example, there's also another project I worked on, the Sea Clear project. That one was directly with the Department of State in the US. And the way this project worked is the Department of State agreed with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Egypt that they wanted to develop the Center for African Resilience. And then the only missing part was who would implement the project here locally. And then, so the call came out from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on a local level who is willing or interested in accepting this, because it's a massive project, it's like $10 million. So it's a big project for Egypt, or in general. So then we had to go in, submit a proposal to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but then it was just a local context. It's just us to the ministry. We didn't have to talk from a different context. And then when we got accepted, then we had conversations with the Department of State to kind of finalize budget talks or finalize project implementation issues and stuff like that. Not a straightforward answer, but nothing here is straightforward.
Yes, that definitely a perfect overview of what happens in that area that is so complex everywhere. We are getting questions from the students in the chat, so I wanted to go over those questions with you too. The first question is, how do you stay motivated when you encounter difficulties in starting up a project, and especially regarding the funding again?
Yeah. It's cheesy, but I have a great team, honestly. It's very cheesy, I know, and somebody's gonna roll their eyes, but I have a great team that's very interested in development work. My boss is fantastic, to be honest. She had her own startup. She's a director for our center. She provides a lot of ownership over our own work. But besides the teamwork, a lot of the thing about you and development and keeping yourself motivated is kind of it's an internal thing. It's like, why are you doing this? And why do you want to be here? And why not just go work in the UN and just don't do much and make good money? Huh, no. But a lot of why I like doing this is because I can end up seeing my work on the field. So I get to end up going to different governorates or watching people come into our workshops. And in the end of the day, you see the work that you do, and then you get not necessarily the thank you from somebody, but like just seeing them actually end up starting up their startup or creating their own brand or whatever, or like just seeing the work at the end of the day actually happen in reality is pretty motivational on its own. Cheesy, but I like it. What else we got?
All right. Well, the next question is, what is an example of a project that you saw evolve based on community feedback? So I know feedback is crucial, and you want to make sure you have also the input of community leaders. So how do you navigate that?
Okay, so I worked on a project called MERS, and MERS is it's a project that wanted to restore mangroves in Egypt. So along the the Red Sea in Egypt, we used to have a lot of mangroves in a place called Marsalam. And Marsalam, back, I don't remember how long ago, but like a very long time ago, had a lot of mangroves. And for some reason, they died out. Climate change or whatever reasons, people play too much. We're not exactly sure why. So the project aimed to restore the ecosystem um, for mangroves there. And the way it worked is it had different aspects. We had to plant. We had to do over, or we still have to do over 200,000 plantation work. Yeah. So planting at least 200,000 mangroves along the Red Sea. We had to help the community kind of understand what climate change is. We had to help them understand why mangroves are important to the community and why mangroves are important to climate change. And we had to help them also start 3 startups. And then during this project, the biggest issue here was trying to work with the community because nobody had worked with them before on this big of a scale. The only work that was ever done before was through government work. So it wasn't, they weren't very exposed to development agencies. So we went in. The project essentially just wanted to do startups, to show them the startups, give them business models, and be like, "Hey, yalla go, you can work on this on your own." And then obviously this didn't work out. People rejected the idea, and we had to start over. So we had to sit down with village leaders. We had to understand the context a little bit better, and then you couldn't talk to the villagers without talking to the village leader first, because they would just reject you. They wouldn't have conversations with you because they had their own system, they had their own rules, and we were failing to follow their rules, which is kind of the whole point. You have to follow the rules so that they can play along with you in the game. So we edited our strategy a little bit. We went to the village leader first. We had to understand what was going on, what was important, the priorities, and then from there, the startups are going to work next year, inshallah. But we are at least they help us with the mangrove plantation, so it's really fun. Like a whole family day every now and then. Cool.
I have another question for another student. Do you have a
Yeah.
specific policy or project that most inspires you to stay in a development work?
Ooh. Complicated. I like them all. I like MERS, I think, the most. Because MERS, I like all of the projects that I worked on. It sounds very biased. like a mom picking favorite children. But I like MERS the most because MERS has a little bit of everything. It has a little bit about climate change. It has a little bit about gender equality. It has a little bit about social inequalities in general. Education, bringing people together, providing startup ideas, building business service centers, just doing a lot of different things, and you get small wins and you get big wins. And the problem with development sometimes is that you have to wait for big wins or like long-term wins. And then these small wins that kind of keep you going every now and then, depending on your personality, you don't really get that all the time because it takes a while for you to see the result of the work that you do. And the cool thing about MERS is that you can get the long-term effects and the short-term.
Thank you, Tarek. More questions coming in. Next question is Project 2030, or I guess Vision 2030, getting the representation of women in CEO positions of to 30%. So is this the sole criteria when choosing a candidate, or is it their respective capability compared to that of their competition, regardless of the sex?
Yeah. So the thing here is it's not about obviously it's not about just reaching 30%, right? Like the whole idea is how do we get, there's two things to face here. Is the social norm of getting corporations or people who are stuck in previous mindsets to understand that it doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, you can still be on a corporate board with a specific skill set that you have. So that's one thing, is that's how you tackle a corporation. Getting them to be aware that diversity is important, getting them to understand that you need to have a diverse boardroom, because then everybody will provide their own perspectives or their own backgrounds or their own understandings. But the important thing, obviously, is to make sure that everybody in the corporate boardroom is skilled enough, is willing enough, is um, qualified enough to be there. Not just the women, actually, men too. I've seen corporate boardrooms that have very underqualified men, or some boardrooms, because I get the report from the Egyptian stock market on corporate boardrooms, and sometimes it'll be a giant corporation that has three, like just three board members for the whole corporation, like thousands of members or thousands of employees. So no, it's not about just making sure that we reach 30. Actually, we want to reach 50, but 30 is like the milestone to 50. But making sure that everybody on the corporate boardroom is qualified, everybody deserves to be there, but that the opportunity for women is also as equal as the opportunity for men. It's not about gender or not.
I'm going to go into the next question. This one is more on culture. So how
Ooh.
can organizations foster culture of continuous learning and adaptation in the developing sector?
Whoa, I'm getting tested. How can I read this question? Sorry, where is it?
Of course. I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Oh, thank you. Oh, you get them
No
differently.
problem.
Okay.
There we go.
How can organizations foster a culture of, I'm going to assume this means the actual organization that I work in, right?
Yes.
So interesting. So I think we just do this automatically, honestly. So I work right now in my center. We're about 30 people. We have 4 project managers, and it's a very diverse group of people. And I kind of wish all of them were here so you would see how diverse they are. But the way this works is everybody's been so invested in the projects that they've been through and the life that they've led, or the work that they've received, like the work that they've achieved until now, that we kind of automatically just sit down and talk to each other, and there's this aura of continuous learning on its own, because you sit with somebody who's working on USAID Scholars Program, and then they teach you about the work that they're doing on their own, and then you kind of get a lot of the learnings from them that way. We have very clear channels for communication. We are invested in each other's work, because a lot of times what could happen is that we get isolated in our own projects. But thankfully in this center, it's hard because our workspace is very open. So there's no doors, there's nothing. It's just all in one room. It gets very loud sometimes, very messy. But we have a separate space for meetings, so it gets a little bit better. But because of the way or the structure of our environment on its own, we're forced to talk a lot, just by like, not forced, but like naturally talking a lot, naturally listening to each other, naturally getting involved in each other's projects. And then we're constantly learning, because individually we have to get better. So I need to do better in my own field. So if I received women on boards, but I've only been working on for 2 months, and I don't have that much information, then obviously I need to be some form of expert one way or another on the topic. So I need to read, I need to learn, I need to talk to a lot of people, I need to communicate and network and get into my field and just use my phone for 27 hours a day and kind of get all this information and learn as much as I can. So it just kind of happens naturally, but also I think it's because of the way our open space looks. It's a mix of both.
Thank you, Tarek. And I'm just going to share one slide until we go into the next questions. I'm going to encourage the students to continue putting those questions in the chat. But just wanted to share one more slide with the students. Just 1 second here. All right, and this goes in reference to our TTR for next week. So we first wanted to thank Tarek. Tarek shared his experience of being an FIU alumni and also working in the developing work. I know some of you also would like to get some links about the presentation from today. So Tarek, you can share those with us. We'll be happy to incorporate them as part of the YouTube recording. But before we conclude for the day, I just wanted to remind everyone that as of next week, we're going to be starting our TTRs in person in GC 150. We're going to be having a panel on a discussion on unmasking labor trafficking in South Florida, overcoming barriers to address labor needs, moderated by the International Rescue Committee. If you also would like to share feedback on TTR topics that you would like to see us include for the spring series, we also encourage you to visit this QR code, go.fiu.edu/TTR feedback, so we can go ahead and incorporate those topics as well as we prepare. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing once again, and we're going to continue with the next question. And this question is actually, it's a question more on the academic side, right? So the students at FIU are doing different degrees in different areas. Some of them are interested in going into the sector to support the SDGs. So what do you think that are some of the key skills that the students should focus on developing while they're doing their academic years to prepare for a career in the development sector? So any advice that you can give them? I know you mentioned public speaking as being one crucial one, but besides that, what else would you recommend for them to engage in?
Okay. So I'm trying to think about the most things that I use, right? Or like what I do every day like what I do daily. And I think networking is one of the most important things, definitely. Just how to network, how to talk to people, working on my elevator pitch. How can I, in 30 seconds, tell somebody, oh, this is what I do and why I do it and why it's important. And this is why you should give me your business card or take mine. And let's continue this conversation forward. How to be a little bit, I don't want to know, not like smooth, but not smooth because it sounds weird, but just trying to make sure that you understand how to convey your messages quickly and in the best way possible. So it's a weird balance. Writing, definitely need to be writing a lot and working on your writing skills and try to get concept notes or proposal writings or whatever you need to be working on as fast as possible, because translating all these ideas that you have in your head into some piece of paper is not super easy or super simple or even direct sometimes. But practicing and working on it really does help. I think those would be the most important too, right? Like, so how to network, how to write as fast or like as well as possible and like illustrious as possible. And just how to utilize your own network, not necessarily. So it's not networking, not meeting new people, but how to make sure that the people you do have can be utilized in the best way possible. So I have friends that work in different areas. How can this person help me out? How can I help them out? How can we kind of have this mutually beneficial relationship in one way or another? Kind of like here. So I joined this TTR today because me and Janeri stayed connected all these years after I left. It's been 5 years, I think, since I left, or 4 years since I left, and we're still here. And it was super simple, super easy, just because we networked well enough, and all she had to do was ask.
Thank you, Tarek. And then there is a few more questions coming in. One of the students, I wanted to hear about your opinion on transition to hydrogen fuel within the SDGs framework.
Whoa, what is this? No comment? Listen, so this is a very political question back home, so I can't really talk. I would need to do a lot more research, to be honest, to give you a proper answer. Because I don't like talking about things I'm not extremely well versed in. I know that hydrogen fuel does have a lot of positives and negatives and very debatable, especially here in Egypt. We signed multi-million contracts for development of hydrogen, like green hydrogen plants. So I honestly, I can't give you a straightforward answer. I'm not really sure entirely. Sorry. But I'll come back. I'll send you a paper about it.
Sounds good. And the last question for this afternoon TTR, what are some of the challenges that it sees in creating a diverse leadership team in corporations?
Okay. So I don't know if I can tell you specifically in a corporate setting, because I haven't had that much interaction yet. But I will say that a lot of the challenges in general, anywhere, with a group of people that are diverse enough or opinionated enough or they have strong personalities in that way, is that a lot of times people really just want to get their point across and they don't know how to do that in the best or most effective way. Diverse groups in general need to have, or people in general need to have a lot more, they need to increase their communication skills a lot more. All of us, really, doesn't matter if you're in a corporate or not, working on our communication and being able to get our ideas out within a group, with a group of people is a very daunting task for some. And from what I've seen in corporations, especially in corporate boards, is that ego is a big thing. So even if we're all right, or even if we all have good opinions, or even if we're just discussing something that may not necessarily matter that much, who comes out on top is really a big deal, because that ego or that power play or that power move in corporate world is a little bit of a flex. So that would be the biggest issues that I've seen so far. But generally speaking, communication is key for everything, honestly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tarek. This concludes all the questions, and I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the Global Learning Office and also FIU for such a fantastic conversation today. It was really a dialogue among the students and your practice. So we really appreciate your time, your dedication, and the support that you give to all these national goals and also global goals. With this, we're concluded TTR for today. So I'm gonna stop the recording.